Welcome to Cultural Luminaries episode 2. Today I'm talking beyond the bottom line with Rebekah Bastian, my guest. Here on Cultural Luminaries, we explore leadership and systems change through sharing stories with leaders who are lighting the way during a time where we really need the light more than ever. So thank you, Rebekah Bastian, for being with me today. Welcome to Cultural Luminaries.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So, for the benefit of our audience who might not know who you are, Rebekah, please introduce yourself to us. Share some of the amazing things that you do with working with the world as an artist, as an entrepreneur, as a leader. And the question that I asked all of my guests is, share what lights you up. And while you're answering, I'd love to invite any of our guests on the live stream to share what lights you up in the chat as well. Go ahead, yes.
Rebekah. Well, professionally, I work in technology. I've been in product management and tech leadership for over 2 decades now. I'm currently senior vice president of product and marketing at Glowforge, which is this really cool company that makes laser cutting and engraving machines for artists and entrepreneurs and educators, and have worked at big companies from Microsoft to Zillow to my own startup that I created. So the full range there. The ways that I more identify are really as an artist, as a writer, a mother, a friend, a community member. So those are both how I identify and what lights me up. I think that having strong, authentic connections with really meaningful communities and creative outlets, creating things are the things that really keep me going and tie it all together.
I mean, that's definitely how I would think of you too. Like, of course, you have this super shiny professional career, and I love that you went from like being a corporate executive at Zillow to starting your own startup, OwnTrail, which was an incredible organization, and leading this kind of authentic community with ways that as startup founders, as leaders in our community, how can we use technology for good? And I know you've been an incredible voice in that movement. And to see you now, like, working as a senior vice president in a company that is really all about creativity and enabling and empowering creatives with like cutting edge tools, like literally cutting edge tools. It's so cool to see. But I know, like, the way that I know you, and one of the reasons we're friends and one of the reasons I like you so much is that you are a creative. Like, you host craft nights, you do aerial silks, you're just one of those people that's always creating. And I think about how those, like, the public facing as well as like kind of the more private or like creative things that you do really are meshed together and maybe two halves of the same coin. And I would imagine that your creative like practices really fuel how you're able to make an impact as a leader in the world.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it all ties together, especially looking backwards when it's easier to connect dots that way, right? But yeah, I mean, I think that the creative act, the artistic act, is both like a deeply personal, internal thing that that really helps with my sense of understanding and place in the world and understanding of the world. But it's also very external in terms of like when you're creating art, when you're creating writing or performance or any of the things, like it's also as a means to communicate your perspective to others and to maybe unleash ideas or feelings in other people as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. So as creatives, I know, like, as a creative myself, and you're a creative, and a lot of people that are tuned into this show are also either creative or wanting to be more creative. And I know that culturally there's a lot that we're up against. There are a lot of barriers to us being able to be creative. And so my first real question for you is about, in your view, how is our culture shifting today? Like in my book, I talk about this concept of capture culture, which is a mainstream culture that drains our energy, that commoditizes us, that basically take so much of our energy that we have little left to actually be creative, because our nervous systems are so activated right now. And I think that's true today in 2024, more true than it's perhaps ever been. But talk to me about, like, in your view, how is our culture shifting today, and what do these changes mean for leaders, for us as leaders, for you as a leader, for those on our call today who see themselves as a leader? What cultural shifts do we need to be paying attention to through this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I have 8 different answers to that question. A lot to unpack there, but let's start somewhere.
Start with one. Let's start with one.
Yeah. Well, so I think like one thing that like tying together both like culture and I think workplace culture is kind of the underlying question there with creativity, and I think there's definitely one area that feels like there's a tension, which is the kind of the idea of like white professional norms within the workplace and the level of assimilation or just trying to kind of work to conform to these norms that aren't necessarily the norms for the full spectrum of people that exist within that space. Like the more mental energy people have to spend to fit in, to feel like they belonging in the space, to feel like they're kind of showing up in the right way, the less mental energy is left for things like creativity or even like enjoyment and productivity and stuff like that. And so, I think like that is a tension that exists in most workplaces, and it can really stifle creativity. And when we talk about how culture is shifting, I think that there's definitely a desire for people being able to feel creative, feel fulfilled, feel like they can be doing their best work, right? That's probably always been a desire, but I think people have more words for that now and more expectations around it. And so, when you think about as leaders, like I think part of being a good leader is supporting your team in a way that takes away the unnecessary processing and work and create space for the more productive and creative activities.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I just think about like what people are carrying emotionally when they enter the workplace. Like I know what I'm personally carrying when I enter the workplace, what I'm worried about, what's keeping me up at night. Perhaps the interactions that I've had with other people that have hurt me or that are just causing me stress. And I think as leaders, like as you're talking about, how do we really cultivate an environment where these like professional norms, these white norms, these patriarchal norms are really encouraging us to show up as emotionless, as objective, as having a separate professional self that is very stoic, and leaving our kind of fears and stressors at the door. And as a leader, I know that, well, first of all, not even as a leader, but as like a woman of color, I know how powerful it is when somebody acknowledges what I'm struggling with, even just takes a moment to say, hey, like I know this thing might have happened, like are you, like so many of my friends in this post-election moment, how are you doing, are you okay, how are you feeling? And people are like, actually I'm feeling kind of stressed, or I'm feeling worried, or I'm feeling concerned. And what we know in neuroscience is when you affirm or validate somebody's experience, like it actually creates a sense of safety in the nervous system. And that is kind of the baseline that we need to build creative practices off of, is this baseline of feeling safe in our bodies. And in order to feel safe, we kind of have to acknowledge some of the muck that we collectively are wading through,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like that's part of the mental space of even like if I'm feeling scared and sad and all the things about what's happening with politics or what's happening in the world or all different things, and then I'm asked to pretend like none of that is actually impacting me, like that takes work in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And that's work, that mental and emotional work that could be going to more more creative and productive things if I just was given the space to just kind of feel that and acknowledge it, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Emotional labor. It's one of the so last week on episode 1, I interviewed my partner of 24 years, Tushar, and that was one of the things he shared, like as a male ally, that one of his biggest learnings has been, he's like, I had no idea how much extra emotional labor women have been doing this whole time, like behind the scenes, and what it takes to kind of move through the world with a heightened sense of risk and a heightened level of threats that we run into. And so I just think that how do we as leaders like really reduce those threats, create a sense of safety, and and to reduce that level of emotional labor that's required just to show up and do your job, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I have another angle to that, if you want to dig into that question a little bit more.
Yeah, go on.
Another angle I was thinking about aside from that as well is kind of societal norms around what we're supposed to do. I'll put it as broadly as that. And I think that it impacts both creativity and workplace culture in terms of like, there's the societal norms that basically like, we start off being completely creative beings, although maybe you don't have the dexterity to express it in all the ways, right? As babies and as children. And then society kind of tells us all the things we should feel embarrassed about or feel are wrong or feel are risky or whatever. And then we kind of scale back on that creativity accordingly.
Yeah.
Similarly, we're told like, well, you're supposed to know what you're going to be when you grow up, and you're supposed to know exactly where you're going, and you're supposed to know exactly how you're going to get there. And that really leads to a workplace culture of like career ladders and, actionable next steps to get to the next thing. And I think that with both of those kind of what we're told we're supposed to do things, like that doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of fulfillment that I think people are looking for or need, right? Because creativity and career development are both really like inherently, I believe, should be these more nonlinear, open-ended kind of explorative things. And I think that the workplaces who embrace that in their culture, probably both retain employees, keep employees happier, and provide so many more opportunities for growth and learning than the ones that are like really strictly in the this is how it's done mode.
Totally. Totally. And I know, and I can just kind of like close my eyes and imagine what it must be like to work for you or your team at Glowforge, and how it's probably like the complete opposite of some of these stiff, uptight corporate environments.
Yeah, maybe a little bit unhinged, a little bit funny.
There's definitely, it's more than just fun to be in that kind of environment where being messy and being yourself is encouraged. Like we know now that is actually the kind of culture where you can come up with better ideas, where there is more learning from mistakes, learning from failures, where there is the ability to navigate conflict with more trust and to disagree respectfully. And we know now that those things lead to like better business outcomes as well. Being able to navigate conflict, being able to learn, those are all dependent on our ability to not be afraid to get messy, to make mistakes, and that is exactly the kind of culture that we need stepping into this next year, this next era.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely work to get there across the board, but yeah, I think it feels kind of obvious, right?
Well, that's the thing about this work, is we're stating things that I think people already know, and the challenge is that taking these lessons from being something that we know in our heads makes sense, and there's a lot of research to back it up, to actually something that we can practice. And that's where we're at this moment, is we know what we're supposed to be doing, we know what success looks like, but now it's like about actually doing the work and translating that theory into practice, which is where so many of us are at. All right, I'm going to ask you my next question because we could talk about creativity and the neuroscience of creativity all day long. But I really want to talk to you about corporate social responsibility, and this is kind of the main topic of our conversation today. And so we're talking about creativity, we're talking about the extra emotional labor that certain groups are doing in the workplace. I know that as a mother, and you're a mom too, like we think a lot about the long term, like where is our society going? And, here in Seattle, we have a housing crisis, much like many parts of the country where there's a huge kind of income inequality, wealth inequality, and housing is becoming increasingly difficult for people to afford. And so in my upcoming book, Creating Culture, I interviewed you about the work that you did while you were at Zillow, developing and working with a program called the Housing Connector Program, where you worked on a cross-sector team to essentially think about ways that to utilize Zillow's resources and expertise and community networks to help address some of the issues that the housing crisis has been causing. And so I'd love to ask you, when you worked on this project at Zillow, can you tell me share with our audience a little bit about what it was and why it was meaningful to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it started off with just recognizing that Zillow had become the largest and most trusted real estate brand and had, an amazing tech stack of tools around finding housing. And so it just kind of made sense that we should be leveraging that to solve some of the issues around housing stability. And I started off just kind of playing with some concepts with a bunch of the engineering team during what we called Hack Weeks, where we built out basically a program called Community Pillar originally that was focused on trying to connect people that had housing for rent with people that needed it, and identify the landlords and property managers that were willing to kind of overlook some of the traditional checkboxes to help more people access housing. We made a lot of progress with that, and then it didn't really go too much further because what we identified, which is kind of obvious during that time, is that I'll say it is obvious now, but a lot of people don't realize this, is that just purely a technology solution can't solve systemic issues, right? And I think the technology sector has a tendency to be very arrogant sometimes in terms of we can fix this with technology. And yeah, technology can be a very powerful tool, but it can't exist in isolation. And so the evolution of that program, and actually the evolution of my career as well, as I pivoted from vice president of product to starting this whole new org within the company and becoming vice president of community and culture. And part of that charter was really growing out this social impact program in conjunction with the CSR team and other things within the company, but really taking that to the next level in terms of public-private partnerships and working with local organizations, both government and nonprofit organizations, and working with the Housing Connector eventually to really scale it out in a way where the relationships are part of it and the full systemic support was part of it, and Zillow was able to provide the technology that made that accessible and discoverable. And so, the program is still growing today. I left over 4 years ago now, and it's been expanding and growing. And I'm so happy to see that, because I think it's been a really important example of a leading tech company being able to leverage the skills and resources and reach that they have to build on top of an already existing infrastructure, right? So it's not just we'll just make a little app on the side. It's no, it's building on decades of work and reach. And so that ended up being really powerful.
Wow. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that for so many reasons. And, to our earlier point about, what does it really take to create a kind of culture that is responsive to the challenges we as a society are facing, today in 2024. I think that there's a sense of responsible leadership you know, like, and responsible use of technology that comes to mind, because you know, I worked in an engineering company for a long time, and I completely resonate with you how technical people, scientists, engineers tend to take really complex cultural problems and reduce them down to technical problems with technical solutions. And you know what you talked about, like with this cross-sector collaboration, you know, working across sectors with education, with government, and kind of not reinventing the wheel with relationships and infrastructure that's already in place with these kind of boots on the ground community organizations that already are aware of these systemic issues, already have the relationships in place to be able to relate to and to connect with, on both understanding a problem as well as implementing solutions to a problem. Like these, I can imagine like these relationships that you had working on the Housing Connector program as kind of a web through which resources were flowing. And it's really easy when you're working inside of a corporation to become like in a bubble, you know, to kind of become disconnected from the communities that you serve. And I'd love to hear your take, like, you know, both when you were working on the program and perhaps even now based off of what you know that this project kind of evolved to be, like, what do you think the benefits really are of implementing this kind of cross-sector collaborative effort, not just for the corporation involved, but also for the community at large? Like, what do you think the benefits are societally, culturally? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I was starting to, and just quick check that my video is working. I think I touched something and it got weird for a second, but
you're good.
Hopefully, okay, cool. When I started becoming interested in, like, you know, figuring out solutions within this space, I did a lot of trying to, you know, connecting with people that had been working in the area around homelessness and housing stability, and it was really cool because, like, you know, huge learning curve for me starting from scratch. I mean, before I joined Zillow, I didn't even know anything about real estate, really. So coming from the tech standpoint and like learning about real estate and then learning about the kind of full spectrum of experience around it. So I met, you know, amazing people that had been spending years or decades working on these problems, you know, and so, you know, really great context there to get. But then also, like, it was amazing. I was invited into a lot of spaces because it was valuable for them to have different, like, tech perspectives and fresh kind of strategic ideas and stuff. And so I ended up serving on a few different boards and committees. Ultimately, I ended up joining the board of Bellwether Housing 8 years ago and have been and serving on there. And that's been, you know, a really amazing organization to be part of. But really, you know, got to work, and it was just a very mutual, two-sided kind of relationship in a lot of ways in terms of being able to share expertise and ideas and resources across sectors and across backgrounds. So very, like, I think enriching for all of us, and definitely led to better solutions to, again, come in with some humility. You know, I can say that, like, I'm good at, like, problem solving and strategy and coming up with technical solutions and stuff like that, but, like, you know your limits. And I think, I mean, it's like, to be honest, when I started working in this space, I had a lot of kind of, like, tech bros reach out to me and be like, oh, I have this app I'm going to build for this. I'm working in this too. And I'd be like, oh, cool. Like, have you connected with this and this and this organization that are thinking about it? And they're like, no, I know what I'm going to do already. You know? So I think trying to like come at it with more humility and collaboration, and, like, really good things come from that.
Yeah, it's just mutually beneficial on so many levels, you know. And I think about how like, there's a clear, like, I think ROI, you know, from an individual standpoint. Like, for you as a human that cares, being connected to, you know, to serve on the board of a community organization that's connected to your values, to be able to build those relationships, to be able to share some of what you're learning and the resources you have access to with these community organizations that perhaps don't have as many resources, but then in return you getting kind of access to these perspectives and rooms and spaces where the problems and the solutions are really real, like where they're happening. So I think that that's really cool. Now, in terms of like, you mentioned tech bros, right? And so I I have to kind of bring this back into focus because, you know, we live in Seattle, here in the Pacific Northwest, even on the West Coast. The technology sector is huge. It's a huge part of our local economy, with Microsoft and Amazon being headquartered here in the greater Seattle area. And we talk a lot about kind of the centralization of power within these technology companies. And these technology companies do have so much power and influence over how our society is evolving, how our culture is evolving. And sometimes it feels to me like that we're in a little bit of a, like that tension that you spoke to when we first started our live stream. Like there's a tension between kind of the interests of these technology companies and their desire to keep growing and to keep, you know, influencing and keep making money, and and the rest of us, like people that really are looking out for, you know, not just successful economies but successful communities and a healthy, thriving planet for all. Talk to me about, like, what do you think it's really going to take for us to create a culture where things are more balanced? Like, we know that in these tech companies, inside a lot of the rooms where decisions are made, that the perspectives are pretty homogeneous. You know, tech bro culture is a huge cultural wave that's taking place, and it doesn't appear to be getting smaller, it appears to be growing. So what do you think we as people, as leaders that care about bringing more balance into these institutions and creating a culture where everybody can succeed, not just tech bros, but everybody, what do you think it's really going to take for us as culture creators, as leaders, to counteract those forces?
I mean, it's a big question, right? Clearly has not been solved yet. So I like simultaneously have, like, throughout my life and my career, have become increasingly jaded about the concept of, like, just need to get to the top and then change things from within. But at the same time, like, that's been the only thing that's proven to work yet. You know, well, not the only thing. I mean, there's definitely people building completely on the side,
Yeah.
and seeing huge successes. But like, but when you look at corporate change, it's slow and painful, and it does kind of happen from within, or from like an implosion of, like, you fucked around and found out kind of thing.
Yeah.
like either like explosive repercussions or slow, painful change.
Sure.
So I mean, you know, I think like my experience at Zillow was like the reason I was able to like create that whole program and a lot of other programs around culture and equity and belonging was because I had like grown there and knew how to, you know, had respect, had a seat at the executive table, had enough of a passion to push for it, you know, and that took years and years to get to that table, and many more years of pushing for those things and always kind of being a squeaky wheel and stuff, which is not, I mean, like, it's a good company. The reason I was able to get stuff done there is because there's people with their hearts in the right places too, but like, it still takes a lot of work, you know, and I think like kind of back to the idea of like these non-linear career paths and creativity, like that's it. Like there's not going to be like a job description to apply to that is like, oh, come dismantle existing systems and create better ones, right? Like that's not a job you can apply to. It's something where you have to be like thinking creatively, taking lateral swings within your own career, opening up doors that weren't doors before, you know?
Yeah.
And so like, I think a lot of the inherent cultural pieces that we want and need are also the ingredients to creating more change, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And yeah, we're not going to kind of, I think, topple these harmful systems overnight, because so many of us simultaneously, while we're harmed by them, depend on them for our livelihoods, you know, And I know that there's a lot of families that are able to like stay housed and stay fed because of this industry. And so it really is a complicated issue. But I also know that there's just a lot of ways that we can create alliances and build relationships with people that we trust, whether it's inside these organizations or outside, right? And that's what this, what your work with the Housing Connector program at Zillow, I think, really represents, is how do we build relationships with those who we align with from a values perspective. And during my years at Boeing, that was what brought me life, in spite of like the same kind of bureaucratic dynamics that you've described being frustrated by. I think every single corporate employee experiences that and can relate to it. But what kept me going, and I think what keeps a lot of people going, and I talk about this in my book, is the ability to create a counterculture and to be creative, to be able to create that environment where we can keep it real with each other, where we can come up with wild ideas, where we can hold each other accountable to actually making some of these bold ideas come true and do the work every day to do things differently. There really does need to be a differentiation, I think, between what you're building in your special, like, trustful bubble and perhaps the harmful norms that you are actively pushing back against. And one thing I know, like, through this moment in 2024 is the importance of building those networks of safety, of trust with people that you trust. And that can happen anywhere. It can happen inside a corporation, it can happen outside, it can happen across community lines. And to me, that's like, it's like, how do we focus on the world within our reach and hold each other accountable to being different, to differentiating ourselves from that which wants us to assimilate, so
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that sometimes when I get too bummed about the macro level of things, the kind of the systems that are so broken, or not broken but terrible, then I zoom in, and there's actually a lot of people, individuals, who are inherently good people that want to make things better, especially especially within the communities that I've curated around me. So I'm all really lovely bubbles, but kind of zoom in on those when you need it. And then and there's so many more people that want to do the right thing but don't really know how. So I think the idea, another thing as leaders, is this idea of creating pathways for people to channel their energy or their resources or their passions in ways that collectively can create some of that change. And so, as leaders, you don't have to do it all yourself, but having a vision and leading people towards that vision is how change starts to happen. And so, finding those people and helping create opportunities to channel their energy in the ways that they want to.
Oh, I love it so much. And I think it's a beautiful way to kind of bring this beautiful conversation to a close, which is, focus on the world within your reach. And I think of the phrase think global, act local. And, the word bubble is an interesting one. And we've used it today in our conversation in both a negative context as well as a positive context. And for me, the difference is okay, so you're an engineer, so I know you get this. Are the boundaries of your bubble permeable? Are there exchanges happening with the outside world? And I think a harmful bubble is one where you're disconnected, where your boundaries are non-permeable. And a good bubble is one where you've created that safety, but you're also very aware of what's happening outside and taking responsibility for how you, as an entity with power, whether you're a powerful individual with influence or whether you're a company or an organization, how can you look outside of the bubble, understand what's happening, out there in the world, with whether it's a housing crisis or a mental health, epidemic, or whatever it is, any of these systemic issues that we're up against, and realizing that actually there are things that we can do inside this bubble that influence and affect those larger trends. So let's just focus on solving it here, here with the people around me,
Yeah, absolutely. Or just pop into the most comfortable bubble you have and recover, take care of yourself, and then go back out into the scarier, broader ones. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fill your cup and then go out and pour it out. Hi, Rebekah. This has been an amazing conversation. I could chit chat with you all day, and I probably have like 20 more questions I wanted to ask you, but for the sake of time, like, I just want to thank you for sharing your insights on what cross-sector partnerships look like, what corporate social responsibility can look like, what it means to be a creative leader within today's cultural context, and sharing your ideas and tips for how we as leaders can be creative, can use that creativity in service of ushering in a more healthier world for all, especially given all that's happening in the world today. So thank you for your time and energy today.
Thank you. I always love chatting with you. So
I do too. I do have one more question for you before we depart. So I know that you have some incredible things that you do for our community. You have a book. You have there's different ways that people out there in the world, our audience, can engage with you. Tell me, for people on the call who are interested in learning more about you, your work, wanting to support you, what is the best way for people to stay connected with you and support you? What offers do you have on the table that people can engage with?
Well, I've definitely been culling down my social media presence. So the two platforms that I'm present on right now are LinkedIn and Instagram, mostly. So just first name, last name, I think. But
Rebekah Bastian.
Find both of those places, and yeah, I mean, I guess those are the probably the easiest ways to reach me and follow along. Yeah.
What about if we want to buy your book? Where can we buy your book? Blaze Your Own Trail.
Yeah, so Blaze Your Own Trail, really quick, is a choose your own adventure exploration of life paths. Just to put it in like the simplest term possible. It is available anywhere where books are sold, but if you go to owntrail.com/book, there's some links to local bookstores that have it and stuff. So
I love it. Support your local bookstores, people. Oh, Rebekah.
Actually, if you order from Secret Garden Books in Ballard and ask for me to sign it, they'll call me up and I'll run down the street and sign it. So that's a fun thing to do.
I love that. I'm actually taking notes for when my own book gets published. That's a beautiful way. I mean,
it's always just a wholesome feeling in the world to walk down to your local bookstore and sign copies of your book. It's great. Highly recommend.
#life goals. Well, Rebekah, it's been just an honor and a privilege to host you today. Thank you so much for being my guest on Cultural Luminaries episode 2, where we swap stories with leaders who are lightening the way towards a more inclusive, just, healthy future for all. Next week, stay tuned. For those of you who are on the call, I'm really delighted to be welcoming former Vice President of Boeing Test and Evaluation, Dennis O'Donoghue, will be my guest next week. He is a leader who led one of the largest, most ambitious internal mergers in company history. And I was fortunate to be part of this organizational transformation starting in 2008 to 2011. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the story of changing culture inside at Boeing, and the story that we share in my upcoming book, Creating Culture. So if you're around, please tune in at 10 a.m. Pacific time next Friday for episode 3 of Cultural Luminaries. And thank you so much for attending today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. Bye, listeners. Thank you, Rebekah.